My mother-in-law constantly accused me of putting her son against her whenever my husband set any boundaries with her controlling behavior. At our anniversary dinner, she stood up and announced to the entire restaurant that I was manipulative and evil. That's when James finally snapped, "Mom, you're the one destroying this family, and I'm done enabling you." I never imagined that marrying the love of my life would also mean signing up for a 7-year psychological war with his mother, but that's exactly what happened. My name is Melanie, and I work as a marketing manager for a sustainable fashion company in Austin, Texas. I've always prided myself on being diplomatic, patient, and good at managing difficult personalities, skills that served me well in my career but unfortunately made me the perfect target for one of the most manipulative people I've ever encountered. I met James Morrison 3 years ago at a friend's wedding where we were both part of the wedding party. He was the bride's college friend, working as a software architect for a tech startup, and I was immediately drawn to his quiet confidence and thoughtful sense of humor. James was handsome in an understated way, medium height with dark blonde hair and green eyes, but what really attracted me was his genuine kindness and the way he seemed to really listen when people spoke. During the reception, we ended up talking for hours about everything from our careers to our shared love of hiking and craft beer. James seemed genuinely interested in my work in sustainable fashion and asked thoughtful questions about the industry's environmental impact. He was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly down-to-earth compared to some of the men I dated in Austin's competitive tech scene. "I love that you're doing work that actually matters," he said as we watched other wedding guests attempt the electric slide. "It must be satisfying to know that your job is making a positive difference." Our first official date was a hike at Zilker Park followed by lunch at a food truck park, and I was struck by how easy and natural everything felt with James. He was the kind of person who remembered details from previous conversations, who asked follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned caring about, and who seemed genuinely excited to get to know me better. "I had such a great time today," he said as he walked me to my car after lunch. "I'd love to do this again soon, if you're interested." I was definitely interested. Over the following months, James and I fell into a comfortable pattern of weekend adventures, weeknight dinners, and increasingly frequent sleepovers at each other's apartments. James was thoughtful and attentive without being clingy, ambitious about his career without being obsessive, and seemed to share my values about building a balanced, meaningful life. The only potential complication I noticed during our early relationship was James's complicated relationship with his family, particularly his mother Patricia Morrison. James was an only child whose father had died of a heart attack when James was in college, leaving Patricia a widow at 52. According to James, Patricia had never really recovered from her husband's death and had become increasingly dependent on James for emotional support and companionship. "She means well," James would say whenever Patricia called during our dates or showed up unannounced at his apartment. "She's just lonely since Dad died. She doesn't have many friends, and I'm basically all the family she has left." I met Patricia for the first time about 2 months into my relationship with James, when she insisted on taking us both to dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Austin. My first impression was that she was an attractive, well-dressed woman in her late 50s who clearly took pride in her appearance and social status. She was polite to me during that initial meeting, but there was something calculating in the way she observed my interactions with James, like she was evaluating my performance in some test I didn't know I was taking. "So Melanie," Patricia said over appetizers, "James tells me you work in fashion. That must be interesting." The slight pause before interesting suggested that she didn't consider fashion marketing to be particularly substantial or impressive, but I ignored the implied criticism and explained my work in sustainable fashion and environmental responsibility. "How nice," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure that keeps you busy." Throughout dinner, Patricia dominated the conversation with stories about James's childhood, his academic achievements, and anecdotes designed to showcase their close relationship. She had a way of making every topic somehow about her connection with James, effectively positioning me as an outsider observing their special bond. "James has always been such a thoughtful son," she said during dessert, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Even as a little boy, he was always looking out for me. I don't know what I would have done without him after his father died." James seemed slightly embarrassed by his mother's effusive praise but didn't discourage it. When I tried to contribute to the conversation by mentioning something James and I had done together recently, Patricia would listen politely but then immediately redirect attention back to her own relationship with him. After dinner, as James walked me to my car, I gently asked about his mother's behavior. "She seems very devoted to you," I said carefully. "She's had a hard time since Dad died," James explained. "I think seeing me with someone serious probably brings up feelings about losing him and about me eventually starting my own family. She'll adjust when she gets to know you better." I wanted to believe that Patricia's possessive behavior was just a temporary reaction to her son dating someone seriously, but over the following months, it became clear that her hostility toward me was both deliberate and escalating. Patricia would call James during our dates with emergencies that always turned out to be minor issues she could have handled herself. She'd show up unannounced at his apartment when she knew I was there, claiming she'd been in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off food or check on something. She'd make plans with James without consulting his schedule, then act hurt and abandoned when he told her he already had commitments with me. "I just thought we could have our usual Sunday brunch," she'd say with tears in her eyes when James explained that we'd already planned to go hiking. "I've been looking forward to it all week. But I suppose I understand that I'm not a priority anymore." The emotional manipulation was subtle but constant. Patricia never directly criticized me or demanded that James choose between us, but she created a steady stream of situations where James felt guilty for spending time with me instead of catering to her needs. Even more concerning was how Patricia talked about me to James when she thought I couldn't hear. During family gatherings or when I stepped away from the table at restaurants, I'd catch fragments of conversations where she questioned my motivations, my character, or my suitability as a partner for her son. "I just worry that she's not really right for you," I heard her tell James during one family barbecue. "She seems nice enough, but I don't think she really understands what kind of person you are or what you need in a relationship." When James proposed after 18 months of dating, Patricia's behavior shifted from passive-aggressive manipulation to open hostility. She criticized our engagement announcement, questioned our timeline for marriage, and began telling anyone who would listen that I was rushing James into marriage before he was ready. "Melanie is very determined," she told James's aunt during our engagement party, her tone making determined sound like a character flaw. "I just hope James is making this decision for the right reasons." The wedding planning period was a nightmare of constant interference and criticism. Patricia questioned every decision we made, from the venue to the guest list to the menu. She had strong opinions about everything and seemed to view our wedding as a personal affront designed to exclude her from her son's life. "I just think you should consider having the reception somewhere more elegant," she'd say about the charming historic venue we'd chosen. "This place is fine, but it doesn't really reflect James's family standards." When we politely declined most of her suggestions, Patricia began telling relatives that I was deliberately excluding her from wedding planning and turning James against his own family. "Melanie won't listen to any of my ideas," she complained to James's godmother. "She's determined to have everything her way, even if it means hurting the people who love James most." The wedding itself was beautiful despite Patricia's attempts to create drama. She wore white to the ceremony, despite my diplomatic request that she choose a different color, gave a toast that focused entirely on her relationship with James without mentioning me, and spent most of the reception telling guest stories about James's childhood that somehow cast me as an outsider who didn't really know or understand him. "I just hope Melanie realizes how lucky she is," I heard her tell several guests. "James is such a special person, and he deserves someone who truly appreciates everything he has to offer." The first year of our marriage was a constant battle for James's time and attention. Patricia would schedule activities during times she knew we'd planned to spend together, create crises that required James's immediate attention, and guilt-trip him whenever he set boundaries around her demands for his time. "I never see you anymore," she'd complain when James told her he couldn't come over for dinner because we had plans. "Ever since you got married, it's like I don't have a son anymore." The most damaging aspect of Patricia's behavior was how she framed every conflict. According to her narrative, I was a manipulative woman who had somehow brainwashed her loving, devoted son and turned him against his own mother. Anytime James stood up for our marriage or set reasonable boundaries with her, Patricia would claim that I had poisoned him against her. "This isn't like James," she'd tell relatives after he declined one of her demands. "Melanie has really changed him. He never used to be so cold and distant with me." Patricia's campaign of character assassination was both subtle and relentless. She never said anything obviously false or cruel enough to make James completely cut contact with her, but she created a constant narrative that painted me as the villain in their family drama. The situation escalated significantly in our second year of marriage when James and I started talking about having children. Patricia seemed to view our reproductive plans as a personal threat and began making increasingly desperate attempts to maintain her position as the most important woman in James's life. "I just hope you're ready for how much a baby will change your relationship," she told James during one of their phone calls. "Melanie seems very career-focused. I wonder if she'll really be able to prioritize motherhood the way a child deserves." When I got pregnant 6 months later, Patricia's behavior became even more problematic. She had strong opinions about everything related to my pregnancy, from my choice of obstetrician to my maternity clothes to our plans for the nursery. She acted as if she should be consulted on every decision and became increasingly resentful when we made choices without her input. "I raised James perfectly well," she'd say when we politely declined her parenting advice. "I think I know something about what children need." Most concerning was how Patricia began positioning herself as the baby's primary maternal figure. She referred to the baby as my grandchild in possessive terms, made unilateral plans for how she'd be involved in childcare, and seemed to view me as a temporary obstacle to her relationship with her grandchild. I can't wait to have a baby in the family again, she told friends and relatives. I'm going to be such a hands-on grandmother. This baby is going to be so loved. When our daughter Emma was born, Patricia's behavior reached new levels of inappropriate interference. She showed up at the hospital uninvited, attempted to take over feeding and diaper changes, and became visibly upset when I insisted on following the pediatrician's guidelines instead of her outdated parenting advice. Things were different when I had babies, she'd say defensively when I explained why we weren't following her suggestions about feeding schedules or sleep routines. We didn't need all these complicated rules back then. The breaking point came during Emma's first Christmas, when Patricia planned an elaborate family gathering without consulting us and then became furious when we explained that we'd already made plans to spend the holiday at my parents' house. "You're deliberately keeping my granddaughter away from me," she accused during a heated phone call with James. "Melanie has turned you against your own family. She's destroying everything that used to matter to you." "Mom, we're not keeping Emma away from you," James said patiently. "We just want to split the holidays between both families. That's what most couples do." "Most couples don't have one person controlling every decision," Patricia shot back. "Melanie has you completely under her thumb. You used to care about your family, but now you only care about what she wants." That conversation was when I finally realized that Patricia's behavior wasn't going to improve with time or patience. She genuinely believed that I was her enemy and that our marriage was a zero-sum game where my happiness required her misery. No amount of diplomacy or accommodation was going to change her fundamental view that I was stealing her son and destroying her family. James was slower to recognize the pattern of his mother's manipulation, partly because he'd been dealing with her emotional volatility for years and partly because he desperately wanted to believe that she could change. Every time Patricia escalated her behavior, James would try to find compromises that might satisfy both of us, not understanding that Patricia's goal wasn't compromise, it was control. The situation finally came to a head during our second wedding anniversary dinner. James had made reservations at a lovely restaurant downtown, and we'd arranged for my parents to babysit Emma so we could have a romantic evening together. We were enjoying our appetizers and talking about how much our relationship had grown over the past 2 years when Patricia suddenly appeared at our table. "I hope you don't mind me joining you," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without being invited. "I was having dinner with a friend and saw you here. I thought it would be nice to say hello." James looked mortified. "Mom, this is our anniversary dinner. We wanted to spend some time alone together." "Oh, I'm not staying long," Patricia said brightly. "I just wanted to congratulate you both on surviving 2 years of marriage." The way she said surviving made it clear that she didn't consider our marriage a positive achievement. Over the next 20 minutes, Patricia monopolized the conversation with complaints about how rarely she saw us, criticism of our parenting decisions, and passive-aggressive comments about how much our relationship had changed James. "He used to be so much more social," she told me, as if James weren't sitting right there. "Before you two got serious, James had time for his family and friends. Now he's become quite the homebody." "We enjoy spending time at home with Emma," I said calmly. "That's pretty normal for new parents." "I suppose," Patricia said with a dismissive shrug. "Though I managed to maintain my social life even after James was born. I think it's important for couples not to become too isolated." James was clearly uncomfortable with his mother's intrusion but seemed unsure how to make her leave without creating a scene. I was starting to feel like our anniversary dinner was being deliberately sabotaged when Patricia made her most dramatic move yet. She stood up, raised her wine glass, and announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "I'd like to make a toast to my son James and his wife Melanie on their anniversary." Other diners turned to look at us, probably expecting a sweet family moment. Instead, Patricia launched into what can only be described as a public character assassination. 2 years ago, James married this woman who promised to love and support him, Patricia began, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "But instead of gaining a daughter-in-law, I lost my son to someone who is manipulative, controlling, and determined to destroy our family." I felt my face burning with embarrassment as other restaurant patrons stared at our table. James looked absolutely horrified. "Mom, stop," he said quietly, trying to get her to sit down. But Patricia was just getting started. "Melanie has systematically turned my son against me, isolated him from his family, and poisoned his mind with lies about the people who love him most. She's evil, and she's destroying everything good in James's life." The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Our server looked unsure whether to intervene. I wanted to disappear under the table. That's when James finally snapped. "That's enough," he said, standing up and speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, you're the one destroying this family, and I'm done enabling you." Patricia looked shocked that James was contradicting her public denunciation of me. "You've spent 2 years trying to sabotage my marriage," James continued, his voice shaking with anger. "You've manipulated, guilt-tripped, and lied to anyone who would listen. You've made my wife's life miserable, and you've put me in an impossible position between the woman I love and the mother who's supposed to support my happiness. James, you don't understand, Patricia began. I understand perfectly, James interrupted. You can't accept that I'm an adult with my own life and my own family. You can't handle that my wife and daughter are my priority now, not you. So you've decided that the problem isn't your behavior, it's Melanie. He pulled out his wallet and threw money on the table to cover our meal. We're leaving, he told Patricia. And you're not welcome in our home or our lives until you get professional help and learn how to treat my wife with respect. As we walked out of the restaurant, I could hear Patricia calling after us, her voice taking on the manipulative, victimized tone she used whenever James set boundaries with her. You see? She called out to the restaurant full of strangers. This is exactly what I was talking about. She's turned him completely against me. The car ride home was quiet. James was visibly shaken by the confrontation, and I was trying to process what had just happened. After 2 years of escalating manipulation and psychological warfare, my husband had finally seen his mother's behavior for what it really was. I'm so sorry, James said as we pulled into our driveway. I should have shut her down years ago. I should have protected you from all of this. You were trying to maintain a relationship with your mother, I said. That's not wrong. It just took time for you to realize that she wasn't interested in having a healthy relationship with either of us. She embarrassed you in front of a room full of strangers, James said, his voice full of guilt and anger. She called you evil. Who does that? Someone who's desperate to maintain control, and doesn't care who gets hurt in the process, I said. That night, James wrote his mother a letter explaining that he would not be in contact with her until she acknowledged her inappropriate behavior and sought professional help for her manipulative and controlling tendencies. He made it clear that her treatment of me was unacceptable and that he would not continue to subject our family to her toxicity. Patricia's response was predictable. She called James's relatives to complain about how I had finally succeeded in turning her son against her. She painted herself as the victim of a manipulative daughter-in-law who had systematically destroyed her relationship with her only child. She claimed that James was being controlled and that she was just trying to save him from my influence. Most of James's extended family saw through Patricia's narrative, especially after hearing about the restaurant incident from other relatives who had witnessed similar behavior at family gatherings. But a few family members took Patricia's side and attempted to pressure James into reconciling with his mother. She's your mother, his aunt told him during one uncomfortable phone call. Family is family. Maybe you should think about what your father would have wanted. My father would have wanted me to protect my wife and daughter from someone who was trying to hurt them, James replied. He would have expected me to be a good husband and father, which is what I'm trying to do. The no-contact period lasted 8 months. During that time, Patricia escalated her attempts to regain access to James and Emma. She sent cards and gifts that went unreturned, showed up at James's workplace to ambush him with tearful apologies, and even contacted my parents to try to convince them to intervene on her behalf. She seems very upset, my mother told me after Patricia called her. She says she's willing to do anything to fix things with James. She's willing to do anything except acknowledge that her behavior was inappropriate or seek professional help, I pointed out. Her apologies always come with justifications for why she acted the way she did. Finally, Patricia agreed to attend family therapy with James. The sessions were difficult and often frustrating, but they helped James see more clearly how his mother's manipulation had affected him throughout his life, not just since our marriage. I thought her emotional volatility was normal, James told me after one particularly intense session. I thought it was my job to manage her feelings and keep her happy. I didn't realize that her behavior was actually abusive. Patricia made some progress in therapy, but it was slow and inconsistent. She would acknowledge her mistakes in session, then revert to manipulative behavior when she felt frustrated or threatened. The therapist helped us establish clear boundaries around Patricia's involvement in our lives and gave us tools for recognizing and responding to her manipulation tactics. 2 years later, Patricia and I have a civil but limited relationship. She's allowed supervised visits with Emma, she's invited to major family gatherings, and she occasionally joins us for dinner. But the days of unlimited access to James's time and attention are over, and she knows that inappropriate behavior will result in immediate consequences. I still don't understand why you had to be so harsh with me, Patricia told James during one family dinner. I was just trying to protect you. You were trying to control me, James corrected gently but firmly. There's a difference. The most important outcome of this whole experience was that James learned to recognize and respond to manipulation, not just from his mother but in other relationships and situations. He developed confidence in setting boundaries and stopped feeling guilty for prioritizing his wife and daughter over his mother's emotional needs. I spent so many years thinking that love meant never saying no to someone, James told me recently. I thought that if I really loved my mother, I would always put her needs first, even when they conflicted with yours or Emma's. Real love means wanting what's best for someone, even when that's not what they're demanding, I replied. Your mother needed boundaries and consequences, not endless accommodation. Patricia's claim that I was destroying the family turned out to be projection. She was the one whose manipulative, controlling behavior was destroying relationships and creating conflict. By refusing to respect boundaries and attempting to maintain inappropriate control over her adult son's life, she had damaged her relationship with James and created a toxic environment for everyone involved. The irony is that if Patricia had been welcoming and supportive from the beginning, she would have had a much closer relationship with all of us. By viewing me as a threat instead of an addition to the family, she created the very conflict and distance she claimed to be trying to prevent. James and I are stronger now than we've ever been, partly because we've learned to function as a united team in the face of external pressure. Emma is a happy, healthy 3-year-old who knows she's loved and protected by parents who put her well-being first. And Patricia has learned that emotional manipulation and guilt trips are no longer effective tools for getting what she wants from her son. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are actually the ones who are most invested in keeping you from growing and changing. Patricia's love for James was really about maintaining control and avoiding the normal process of a child becoming an independent adult with his own family priorities. Real love means supporting someone's happiness and growth, even when that means accepting less central role in their life. Patricia's inability to do that nearly cost her any relationship with James at all. The fact that she still has some relationship with him now is entirely due to his generosity and willingness to give her another chance after she demonstrated some capacity for change. The restaurant incident was humiliating at the time, but it was also liberating. Patricia's public meltdown revealed her manipulation so clearly that even James could no longer deny what had been happening. Sometimes it takes a dramatic moment of complete inappropriate behavior for people to recognize patterns they've been minimizing or excusing. In the end, Patricia didn't destroy our family, but she came close to destroying her own relationship with it through her selfishness and refusal to accept healthy boundaries. The choice to change her behavior and rebuild trust was entirely hers to make, and she nearly waited too long to make it. Now, when I hear other women struggling with difficult in-laws, I always tell them that the real issue isn't the in-laws' behavior, it's whether their spouse is willing to set appropriate boundaries and protect their marriage. James's willingness to finally stand up to his mother's manipulation saved our relationship and taught our daughter that no one gets to treat the people you love with disrespect, no matter who they are or what they claim their motivations to be.